Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel, and hi if you're new here, I'm Jade and it is time for my June wrap up. I just want to start by saying I am actually filming this on the 4th of July, so if you suddenly hear a big boom, it's probably because people are setting off fireworks. And some of you may ask, isn't it daylight? And yes, the answer is yes, but apparently people here sell fireworks when you can't even see them. It's like a way to burn money, right? And then I mentioned that, and the neighbor's dog starts barking, but hopefully the microphone kind of filters that out. But anyway, without further ado, let's get on, and I can show you what I have been reading this month. I mean, I say this month, it's now July, you know what I mean? June. Okay, so the first book that I read, because it was one that I kind of wanted to read anyway, and my online book club chose it, was Silver Elite by Dani Francis. If you've watched my reading viral books, so you don't have to vlog, you'd have seen me talk quite a lot about Silver Elite, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much. If you want to know more, head over and watch that video. But yeah, let's have a little chat about it. So essentially, this is set in a fantasy world where we learn that once upon a time there was this like toxin released. There was this toxin released, and some people seem to be like immune to it, and other people seem to be susceptible, but then it like enhanced them, like it enhanced their powers. It sort of gave them these like psychic powers, I guess. So now there's a bit of conflict because the immune people, which are known as primes, they sort of, I guess, they kind of rule the universe that it's set in, and they are understandably fearful of what are called the mods because they have these sort of psychic abilities. And I guess you could say there's a little bit of a war between both sides, and essentially it is very dangerous, obviously, to be a mod, and it's better to keep your kind of powers hidden. In this book, we follow the character of Ren, and she ends up at this kind of like military school for primes, and she has to obviously kind of keep her true identity hidden, otherwise she'd be in real danger. That's a very brief summary, but I do feel like talking about this too much does give some of the plot away. There is a love interest. This is essentially classed as romantasy, so yes, she meets a love interest. There are some twists with that, and it obviously makes things a lot more complicated. There's also a big question of who wrote this book. Everyone suspects Dani Francis is just another name for a writer that's actually very famous already. I have seen quite a few theories that it is Elsie Silver, and I was actually watching Jamie Fox vlog. If you don't know her, please go and subscribe. She's an amazing booktuber. I will link her in my description. Yeah, I was watching one of her videos where she was talking about an Elsie Silver book, and she said that often there felt like there were moments where sort of random lines and sexual stuff was just like inserted, and it felt a little bit like just random how it was inserted. It just didn't feel like it flowed with the book, and I kind of felt that with this, and I have seen quite a few people theorize that it could be Elsie Silver. I have not read any other Elsie Silver books, so I need to, so that I can kind of really decipher it for myself. But yeah, rumor has it probably Elsie Silver, maybe. So as you can see, I rated it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, actually. I've seen a lot lower ratings on it, but I actually think the premise of the story is really interesting. However, I think the romance falls a little flat for me. And honestly, I don't even feel like it really needs the romance in there. The story for me is enough alone. That's what I'm interested in. The romance felt almost a little forced. Sometimes some of the characters make decisions that feel a little bit out of character for me in the book. Not always just to do with the romance, but in general. So that's like my other criticism. Yeah, like I didn't hate the romance in it, but it was definitely more lust driven. It didn't feel very romantic, okay? But yeah, if you enjoy a lot of romantasies, I feel like you'll at least enjoy this one, even if it's not going to be a favourite. So obviously, I often am a sort of seasonal mood reader. I call it seasonal mood reader because generally in the summer I prefer those fluffy light romances and stuff, and more thrillers, etc. in the winter. But we've actually had so much rain and storms lately that I feel it may have affected that a little bit. I feel like there's not as many summery books in my list for this month, although there are some. You'll see them coming. But yeah, the next book is going to be a thriller. So the next book I read was The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. I've heard so much about this before, and then I joined another book club, which is quite good because they do it locally but also on Fable. So if you can't make it or anything, which I couldn't because it was the same night I was at the party the other day, you can chat with them all online. So it's really nice in that respect. So I decided to join in, as I'd often had this on my sort of radar anyway. As you can probably see, I gave it 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. So it starts off right in the action, which I really loved, and it explains that a teenager called Barbara, she's gone missing. How the story works is it sort of jumps between timelines and point of views, and often if books do that too much, I either find them too hard to follow, or I just find myself really wanting to read certain characters or timelines more, so I find myself skipping. But actually, with this book, I feel like it was balanced really well, and generally I enjoyed all of it and I wasn't like rushing through anything. So yes, Barbara is missing in the sort of present timeline, and then we sometimes jump back to the past where we find out that her brother also went missing several years earlier. And so the book is about what happened to Barbara, but also about what happened to her brother as well, between the timelines, and sort of solving both of those cases. But essentially, Barbara goes missing at a summer camp, which is sort of held on the grounds of her family's estate. And her brother went missing on the same estate years before, but he wasn't part of the camp when that happened. I can't say too much more because there's so many characters and suspects and plot lines. It really makes you think. And I sort of guessed the odd bit, but generally I didn't see what was coming. There's a lot of like subplots and character links that you don't see coming as well. So I think it's really well done. If you like your kind of like mystery within a thriller, definitely have a read of this one. Okay, then we finally had a little bit of sunshine in the weather, because it is pretty warm now, but it's just we've had so many storms and stuff. But yeah, we had some sunshine, so I reached for Summer in the City, which was chosen by my TBR. This is another book that I'd just seen everywhere this year and ended up just buying, mainly because I needed to spend more to get free postage on something, so I just ordered this on the order. But essentially what this is about is we have our female main character, Elle, and it starts with her going to a nightclub, and she's not really someone who's really into clubbing, you can kind of tell, and she's there and she runs into this guy. There's this kind of like instant attraction, but then he assumes that she's after his money. She's obviously quite offended by this, therefore they sort of end on a bitter note, but for some reason she can't stop thinking about it. But then quite a long time later, she ends up living next door to him. It's not actually her apartment, but she is looking after her sister's apartment while her sister is on holiday because her sister's having renovations. And yeah, she ends up happening to live next door to this guy. She's not sure he recognizes her, but they do talk, and he actually asks her to fake date him because he can sort of tell that she doesn't really like him, that she's not interested in his money, and he needs someone to pretend to be his girlfriend for the summer who he can sort of trust not to be devious and try and get his money, basically. So of course this is just meant to be like a situation to sort of help him out. She agrees because she needs stuff to do in the summer. She has writer's block. She doesn't really know what to write about. So they sort of come up with this agreement and it goes from there. And as you can imagine, they end up falling for each other, but there's lots of complications, etc. It's definitely one of those sort of stereotypical cheesy rom-com kind of books, but honestly, I was loving it. I actually really ended up enjoying the characters in general and how their relationship grew. But the reason for my 3.75 rating, so I still really enjoyed it. It's not a bad rating. But the reason I brought it down a little bit was just due to the ending. Obviously, I can't say too much because I don't want to give away the end of the book, but basically the main character, the female main character, Elle, she just started to annoy me a little bit with her decisions. They seem just a little bit over the top and irrational, in my opinion, and a little bit unforgiving, maybe. So yeah, it just sort of frustrated me a little bit, but that's as much as I can say without spoiling anything. Okay, and then the next book I went for, because again, stormy, I felt like something sort of that sounded a bit more moody. I went to read an arc that I promised I would read within like a 2-week period. So I was approached by author Nyte Roze to read her arc for her first debut, Lady of the Lunar Mansion. It is called Volume 1. It is advertised as like a fantasy horror romance, which I thought was quite interesting, to be honest. But I have to say, I'm going to say it immediately, there was no romance at all. Not one bit. There has been a lot of criticism on this, and the author has sort of replied to that and said actually it builds slowly through the series, so yes, it's not in book 1. I kind of feel like it should have been left out of the description, but I get it. So we should see romance in the series, just not yet. But in this story, we have our main character Nyte, and she wakes up like in a different world. She has no recollection of like who she is in this world. She just remembers who she is in the other world, if that makes sense. So people like talking to her and stuff in this world that she's woken up in. She doesn't know who they are. She then obviously has to navigate this world in a kind of bid to try and get herself out of it. There's a lot of magic and mystery elements to this book, and I will say I think the concept is very unique. There's some very unique parts to this, and I think the author shows amazing imagination. However, you're probably wondering why I only gave it 2.5 stars. So, as I said, it wasn't boring really. There was bits of it I lost interest in a little bit, but for me, it just didn't feel complete. So, even though I know it's only a volume 1 and it is going to continue, I feel like for a debut, you usually have a little bit more of a conclusion than there was. It just felt like the book just cut out. So that's one thing for me. Plus, obviously, we were led to believe there was romance. There was no romance. But the main reason for me I can't rate it higher, because even though I really love the whole concept and the plot line, is I just could not connect with the main female character. So we find out in the book that Nyte is supposed to be 29, but she sounds so juvenile. So there are constantly these lines of what she's thinking, and they're all very childish responses, often quite bitter and sarcastic. And I feel like for me, that just kind of made me not really like the character. And therefore, I just didn't really care what was happening. Also, stylistically, there's a lot of use of onomatopoeia. If you don't know what that is, it's where a writer uses terms like boom, like a firework, or bang, or splash, or something, like a sound that where the word kind of imitates the sound it's talking about, and that's onomatopoeia. It uses it a lot, and I don't know, I just didn't really vibe with having that in there. It might just be a little bit of PTSD for me, because I remember putting one thing of onomatopoeia in a story I wrote back in high school, and my teacher just writing ouch on there. So maybe I'm just a bit biased, I don't know, but for me it just wasn't working. So yeah, as I said, very unique plot. If you're looking for something with a very different plot, especially if you're a bit more into horror than I am, because I do feel like maybe that detracted a bit, although I don't feel it was like too horror related. It's definitely got the fantasy element down, but yeah, you might enjoy it, especially if you're one that is quite willing to continue with the series and see how it goes and where the romance comes in and things like that. But yeah, for me, not bad for someone's like debut, but I just didn't vibe with it as much as I wanted to. Then the next book I picked up was Fredrink Backman's Anxious People. I've been wanting to try a Fredrink Backman book for a while, and I bought this a few months ago. You may have seen it in my massive book haul that I did. And yeah, I reached for this because not the most summery of weather, so I wasn't really leaning to those. And also I had just been feeling super anxious myself, and I thought, maybe it's a sign that I should just pick up this book. But essentially, what this book is about is someone attempts to rob a bank, but it all goes wrong, and they end up holding people hostage in an apartment. They are definitely not a seasoned criminal, though, and it all sort of develops, and we sort of jump back and forth in time to see exactly what happened and what led to what, whether people got caught, what the police did, etc. So we jump between like current police interviews and then back in scenes within the hostage situation. And the way it's written is just so clever. And essentially there are a lot of stereotypes and a lot of hyperbole and exaggeration, and it just made me laugh. I knew Fredrink Backman has a reputation for writing very sad books, and there are definitely some like emotional things and sad elements to this book. But honestly, for the most part, it just really made me laugh out loud, because there's just so many stereotypes and like bits of characters you can recognize. Obviously, very exaggerated, but just if you suffer with anxiety, ADHD, anything like that, I think you'll recognize some of the traits in certain characters in here, and it just made it to be quite humorous. I think it was written so well. I couldn't help but just imagining it as a stage play. Honestly, I feel like someone needs to do that. I do know it is a show on Netflix, but I think it's in Swedish with subtitles, so I haven't watched it, but I might. But I just imagine it as a stage play. I don't know why, but there's just something about the vibe of it. It kind of reminds me a little bit of The Accidental Death of an Anarchist, if you've heard of that play. I just feel like stage-wise it could work in a very similar sort of vibe. Yeah, I really want to see that done. So yeah, as you can see, I loved it. I think it was just quite unique. It, as I said, had me laughing, but also feeling sad at times. Like, it's very good emotionally, and just bits that were sort of relatable to me. So yeah, loved it. Definitely recommend it. 5 stars. So then, after reading my first 5-star of the month, I found my second straight away with Foxglove by Adalyn Grace. This is the second part in the trilogy. Belladonna is the first book, which I read last month or the month before. I can't remember. But I loved Belladonna, and I kind of assumed it would be the same for this one. Obviously, I can't talk too much about this because I don't want to spoil the first book, but essentially the story continues. It still has that perfect kind of mix of that kind of Regency era vibe with some mystery and I guess like a slight fancy magic element. So yeah, it just mixes like all my genres in one, and which is why I love it so much. I love that we get some perspective from Blythe in this one. There's just some really clever elements to it, and I'm really excited to read the third one. That's all I can really say without spoiling anything. But if you like the sound of reading something that kind of has Regency era vibes with some fantasy and romance and mystery, go read these. Okay, the next book I then read was Our Infinite Fates, which was chosen by my TBR. In this book, we have our two main characters, Arden and Evelyn, and it seems like their fates are completely tied together. So when one dies, the other seems to die too. No matter what life they're in, it always seems that Arden turns up to kill Evelyn before her 18th birthday. So in the current life that they're living in the book for the main bulk of the story, Evelyn has a real desire to live because her sister in this life depends on it. So she really loves this life and she does not want to let her sister down. As she gets older, she slowly starts to remember that she will be killed before her 18th birthday, but she only remembers fragments of the past as she gets older, whereas Arden, he ends up remembering everything, like from all the lives. When he's really young in a new life, no, but by the time he is a bit older, he remembers everything from the past. So essentially, she's trying to sort of defy her fate and save her sister, and I find the plot really intriguing. We also jump back and forth between timelines, so we see a lot of their past lives, how the two characters met. They can swap gender in their lives. It's different depending which one they're in, which I just think is a really interesting concept. And overall, I found it a really intriguing read. You might wonder why I only gave it 3.75. Obviously, 3.75 means I still really enjoyed it. The only reason I took it down a little bit was we had a lot of their lives explored, a lot of their past lives, and most of them not in very much detail. So honestly, for me, I just wish we'd had slightly less lives explored, but the ones that we did get, we got more detail. That's the main reason I'm marking it down, because there were some parts where I was like, oh, this is really interesting, this life, and then I just didn't really learn much about it, and that was a little bit disappointing. But other than that, a really good read, and I think a great concept, and just quite a unique story from something I've read before. Then I picked up People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, which is the book club, like my in-person book club's choice for the month. But we are meeting not until mid-July just because of people's availability. So that's why I ended up reading it much nearer the end of June. So it would be more fresh in my mind when I see them. This is my second Emily Henry book, as I have read Great Big Beautiful World this year. So I was definitely looking forward to getting into more Emily Henry. In this book, we follow two friends, Alex and Poppy, from Poppy's perspective, but we follow their sort of friendship. We find out how they became friends. Like the timelines jump, so essentially they go on holiday together every single year. But we find out that this is obviously stopped for some reason. Obviously, we're not told why at the beginning of the book. And there's clearly some kind of tension now in their relationship. However, Poppy is missing Alex and decides to reach out, and they end up planning another trip together where they sort of work through everything that they've been through and their emotions, etc., etc. So yeah, as I said, we kind of jump between the past and the present so we can kind of get a full picture of their relationship. And honestly, I find the characters so sweet. I really, really love them. I love their relationship, and I found it a really interesting read, and also a little bit different again to something I've seen before about friends that vacation together and then grow apart and then want to go back. And yeah, it was nice, you know? It's like, it was quite heartwarming, I guess. So I've given it 4.5 stars. I didn't find it quite as good as Great Big Beautiful World. I loved the plot line completely in that one. I've only given this 0.25 lower. I still really enjoyed it. It's just nothing like super outstanding for me. So I couldn't give it like a 5 star, even though I really enjoyed it, but I think it deserves a 4.5 rating. And I'm looking forward to reading more Emily Henry. And the final book I read was an ebook, so I will display it there. It was just a lot cheaper for me to get as an ebook, and it was something I just wanted to try reading. And that was Lowlands by Adam Cosco. So Adam Cosco kindly gave me one of his books as an ARC back in March, which I adored, which is called The Dream Killer. So I've been wanting to try another one. We've had all these storms, and I was like, it's very fitting to have, a more thriller type story. So I decided to get another one of his books and have a read. So Lowlands is quite a short read, which I think works, but I will say I was hoping for a little bit more detail on parts, but I will explain the plot and explain why. So essentially, this is quite a dystopian, apocalyptic kind of novel. We mainly follow a couple called Grace and Tom, and they seem to have a bit of a complex relationship now that this kind of apocalypse thing has happened. And Tom seems to get obsessed with this other woman who has been infected in this like apocalyptic world, and there is some kind of like virus or something going around which is causing people's skin to kind of go see-through. Very bizarre, I know. And essentially it's about Grace and Tom trying to navigate this new apocalyptic weird world. Grace also seems to have some kind of like psychic abilities, so there's a little bit of a fancy element, I guess, in this, but I would mainly call it like sci-fi dystopian. Essentially, the story really highlights like human fragility, and when dealing with like dark problems in life, how easily led humans are and how easily they actually become corrupt. So I really love the concept. It was very, very unique. But for me, the only reason I've rated it 3.5, so yes, I enjoyed it. It was an easy read, very short. The reason I don't love it like I loved Adam Cosco's last book was, for me in this one, I felt like I really wanted to get to know Grace and Tom a little bit better, because I think emotionally this would have felt a lot more effective. Essentially, because the book's quite short, we don't really get to see much of Grace and Tom before, how they were before the apocalypse, and I feel like that would have helped. I feel like it would have made everything a little bit more emotionally charged. So that's the only reason for me that I just felt there could have been a lot more to this, but the actual general concept and stuff, very interesting, very different. And that is everything I read in June. So I hope you have enjoyed listening. Maybe you found some things that have interested you. If you've read any of them and you have differing opinions or similar opinions, let me know in the comments, and I will see you again real soon. Bye!